Ladies and gentlemen, children who are old enough to figure out how to subscribe to a podcast, welcome to the second episode of the CRZY podcast. And I gotta tell you, I'm in a really good mood today. This is an episode that I've been really excited about. It's something that I've been wanting to do. I'm so excited about it, actually, that I'm gonna break this episode up into two different parts. And the reason why we're gonna do that is because today we're gonna talk about leadership. And there's probably nothing that I love doing more, and probably nothing that I've kind of become known for than the ability to teach and to actually bring leadership into organizations. I've done it in ad agencies, whenever I was the guy who had the old school design background but could sit with the new school digital guys and figure out how to build that bridge. To go into an old guard hotel company and trying to figure out how to bring digital into some place like that, or currently how to come into a 200-year-old bank and bring design into an institution like that. So I'm somebody that not only knows a lot about leadership, but has actually done it. And so here's the thing, right? We talked about this in the last episode. Why is leadership important? And the reason why is because I think in a lot of cases, the reality is that you can only go so far if all you're wanting to do is to be able to execute, to do the thing that probably brought you into your profession. Because the reality is, the more creative you get, the better your ideas are, the more you're sought out to be that essential part of an organization, the more you're looked at to be a leader. Well, here's the thing, and here's a little bit of the rub. What's going to make you really good at being that executor is one set of skills. But what's going to make you be a really good leader, totally different set of skills. And how do you understand that? Because if they're two totally different sets of skills, and it's not something that everybody does naturally, how do you know how to do it? And so this is why I've traveled all over the world. I've spoken to tens of thousands of people about leadership. And so here's the thing, right? Whenever I go and I do these sessions, the egotistical part of me, the part that thinks that the world needs another podcast, is always really happy to see that these sessions sell out all the time. They are standing room only. But at the same time, while my ego may love that, the part of me that does this, that wants to be able to teach, you know what, honestly gets kind of sad and more than a little pissed off. Because the reason why is because it demonstrates to me how much companies, teams, creatives, everybody needs leadership. That it's something that is a discipline, that is a craft that people don't understand, and that all these people are showing up because they're searching for something. And what they're searching for is really been brought about by the fact that there has just been a flat-out systemic failure across ad agencies, companies, big companies, small, to understand how to lead people, to grow a career, to give them a career path that leads to things like innovation, to homegrown leadership, to be able to take the people that are on your team today and to actually do something different with it. Like, one of the things that I've come to realize is that, the stuff that I am the proudest of will never show up in my portfolio. Because the reason why is because the stuff that I'm the proudest of are the people that I've helped change their careers. I've helped turn them into leaders. I've helped get them to a place where they became more than even they thought they might be able to be. That is incredibly powerful. And I think that's why I love talking about this. Because I think that, for me, like, one of the greatest success things that I will always love is that the day that I walked into Starwood, the three people that led the three different disciplines that I had on my design team were the exact same people that I had the day that I left. The only difference was whenever I got there, this was an overlooked creative team that was basically a production resource that nobody really believed in. And the day that I left was we had been in 9 Apple keynotes and currently had the work that we'd done was running globally in an Apple commercial. Exact same people. It was not that I did all this by kind of bringing in a whole bunch of different people. It was that I invested in these people and believed in them. But is that this isn't some fairy tale about how I've always been a great leader. This is me telling you a lot of the things that I've had to learn the hard way, that I've had to fail at, that there are all these times that even as I'm standing here doing this recording, I can think about whenever I go back into work, what are the ways that I wish I was a better leader? What are the things that I'm letting people down? What are the things that I'm doing? So I just want to say, like, look, this isn't a fairy tale. This is actually drawn from real experience for me of really doing this stuff and getting it right some, getting it wrong some, but really kind of having an understanding that comes out of that. So we're going to split this up into two parts. The part that we're going to talk about right now for this episode is how to make you as a person a better leader. Because I think just like with creativity, the change here and the foundation of this has to come from you. Because if you aren't clear on who you are, if you aren't clear on a bunch of different things, there's no way you're going to be able to be clear and lead other people. So we're going to start with that. We're going to start with just you. And then what we're going to do from there in the next episode is then we're going to take some of this stuff that once we have you straight, we're going to figure out how do we then start to apply this to a team? How do we start to go out there and say that, okay, if I'm going to come into an organization as a leader, if I'm going to lead other people, how do I do that? And how do I do it well? And to be able to do it in a place that puts some wins on the board that lets you bring about real change. Because I think that's the thing for me, right? This is not a talk about people who just want to manage things. If all you want to do is to come in and take what everybody tells you and go from point A to point B, and that's all that you want from your life, do me a favor, shut this off now, unsubscribe, because this isn't going to be, I'm not going to be the guy for you, right? Because that's not what I sign up for. I sign up to come into organizations and make a difference. I come in to try to do things differently. And I think that I've had, well, a pretty good track record of doing it. And I think it's one of the few things where I'll give myself that egotistical moment to say that I'm pretty good at it. Let's just jump right in. And so if you're going to be a leader, the first thing that you need to understand is that there are two key things that anybody in any organization, any discipline, no matter what, anything want. And that is, if you're going to be in charge of people, those people are going to want two things out of you. And what those two things are going to be is that, one, they want to know that the work that they're going to do tomorrow is going to be better than the work they do today. They want to know that they're going to grow, they're going to improve, that it's going to get better. Because if not, people inherently get bored because it's just simply doing the same thing over and over again. And I think that that's just, no matter what the discipline is, that's something that people want. They want to feel like they're doing something new. There's an endorphin hit you get out of doing something new. So people want that. The other thing that they want is very basic, but oftentimes very hard to do. And that is the case that whenever it hits the fan, whenever something really goes wrong, whenever there's a place where you could throw them under the bus, that you don't, and that you have their back, and that you're there to be able to support them. That is the other thing that most people really want to know, is that their boss isn't somebody who is just simply there to be their boss, but it's somebody who will actually partner with them as you go through this journey. And I think especially whenever you look at the fact that you do something creative, and we're coming off to talk about creativity, where everything is unique and different, right? Like creative is subjective. Creative is up for debate. Creative is something where it's a process where things are supposed to go wrong, where actually if they aren't going wrong, you're probably not doing it right. So in that case, the leadership challenge becomes even harder. And it becomes even harder still if you want to do something that's innovative, where you're actually going to ask people to change, to do something different. These are all real challenges that you're going to face. And so just like with the last talk, whenever we talked about creativity, I think the other thing that you're going to find with leadership is that here again, unfortunately, there is no magic bullet. Everybody I know who's a great leader does it differently. The same way that I know every creative that I know has ideas differently. Very much for the same reason, because I think that just like with your creative process, the things that you do well, your confidences, the things that you're a little uncertain about, the things that you think are a weakness of yours, all play into your leadership style. But the good news here is that I think that it's something that we can work on. And so I think that kind of before we jump into kind of like specific things to work on, I wanted to talk about what are just some of the common obstacles to leadership, just so that you can have those as guardrails, something to keep in mind about as whenever you go to try to approach this, what are some of the things that you may run up against, or what are some of the challenges that you're going to need to solve for as you start to put these pieces together, as you think about how can you get better as somebody that wants to make a difference. And I think that the first thing that a lot of people may be aware of it, but may not be conscious of it, is perspective. And what I mean by perspective is I think if you're going to come in and lead a group of people, lead an organization, lead anything, you have to be able to do this interesting trick where you need to be somebody who can be an insider and an outsider at exactly the same time. To be an insider, it's somebody that the team has to buy in. They have to believe. They have to know that I have their back, but they also have to know that I'm genuinely invested and working with them on whatever it is we're trying to solve, so that I need to be in the weeds. I need to be working on things. I need to know what people do well. I need to know what they don't do well. I need to be an insider to the team. I need to be one of them. But at the same time, to be effective, if all you ever are is an insider, you can't see the forest for the trees, because all you do is you just run from one problem to the next, without ever having a longer term vision. So you have to be an outsider because you need to be somebody who can take the long view of the team. You need somebody who can see, where do we need to go? Politically, where do we need to position ourselves? Strategically, where do we need to position this group? And so it's this sort of like flip of perspective between inside and outside is a funny trick that you're going to need to be able to kind of master. And the other one really dovetails into what I was just talking about. Whenever you're solving problems, progress becomes a real problem because from a leadership perspective, it's easy to get in the weeds. It's easy to be in there and solving all the little problems for people. But the problem is that if that's all you're doing, you're not making that much progress because the small problems are easy to solve. They can get solved faster. It's a great little kind of hit to feel like you got something done. But the problem is that you aren't solving the big problems because all those little ones are getting in the way of solving what's the real issue and what's the real problem here. So I think you have to be able to take a step back and, again, be that outsider if you want to make progress. One of the biggest things that I also see is fear. And I've seen this, it's probably the biggest reason why I left the ad agency world is because so often I would come in and I would have a really great idea and I would pitch it to a client. And this was a client who had talked to me all about how they were all about innovation. They were all about doing something different, right? They were all about all these things right up until the moment where it meant that they had to do something different. That's where fear comes in. And it's the same thing whether it's leading an advertising account or whether it's leading a team of people to do anything, is because people are afraid of change. Change makes people uncomfortable, and people don't like to be uncomfortable. People inherently, they like routines. They like to know what they're getting into. That uncertainty isn't good for a lot of people. And I think that it also then feeds into this fear that most people honestly are afraid to speak up out of fear because they feel like if they do something different, if they go against the grain, things aren't going to end well for them. I saw a study not too long ago that said 85% of employees, 85%, said that they do not feel comfortable speaking up at work. So from a leadership perspective, if only 15% of the people who work for you will actually tell you the truth, what is the chance that you have of actually being successful? And so I think that this is a huge part of it, is this fear of getting people to be okay with doing something different. The other part that comes with that, and this is something that I see whenever I come in and inherit teams that have already worked together, that they've had leaders in the past. They've had other people who come in and do things. And so those people, whenever they come in, have built up the team with a pretty decent sized amount of futility. The futility really comes out of the fact that they've seen people come in before. They've seen people say the right things. They've seen people try to do this. But at the end of the day, that person came and went and nothing changed. Because whenever it got hard, all of a sudden that leader backed away. Whenever it got hard, that person didn't do anything. So they become incredibly skeptical. They really want to sit back and see, are you going to be able to kind of do anything different? Are you going to be somebody who can actually do something? So overcoming that futility can be a really big issue. And the last one, which for me, I think historically has been easily the most frustrating and the most heartbreaking, has been comfort. And that the comfort is honestly sort of a sister or a cousin to fear. And what it is that at the end of the day, so many people will choose to be comfortable over being great. And it's that trade-off, right? That we will actually let fear win. We will let it affect us to the point where we will pass on doing something new. We will pass on greatness just to be comfortable. And if you're a team that wants to change things, if you're a team that wants to do something different, having that complacency and that comfort is poison. It is something that you just simply cannot have. And so how do you get people to be comfortable with being uncomfortable? With the fact that we're going to ask them to do something new and to do it on a very regular basis, and that they need to get over that sense of comfort. That's just kind of like an outline of what I think are the big challenges that whenever you go into leadership, you just need to be aware of. Don't let them stop you. Don't let them block you. But just be it something that you can just be aware of them. And the reason why I say that is because, for me, I really do believe that there is no secret to being a great leader. I really think that great leadership is made, that it's not born. And I think I only have to look as far as my own career to really think that that's the case, because there are tons of things that I do in a leadership role that I used to suck at. Because, honestly, whenever I was in college, I couldn't speak in front of a group of probably more than 4 or 5 people without being absolutely petrified. That to be somebody who could stand up on a stage in front of thousands of people is something that I've had to learn. to be somebody who is able to move past their own creative process, to be able to understand the process of other people is something that I had to learn. To be somebody who could understand the politics, the strategies, and the dynamics of an organization, to be able to bring the social engineering that you need to be able to craft the belief that you need to put into a team to be a successful leader is something that I had to learn. And I think that the best example of this that I'll always point out to people is whenever you ask somebody, like, who do you think the best leaders of the last century have been? Inevitably, if not the number one answer, often in the top 3, definitely in the top 5, will come Steve Jobs. And the interesting thing for me is that I've been incredibly humbled over my time to have been able to sit down and talk with or work with a lot of people that worked with Steve Jobs. And one of the most interesting ones that I had a conversation with was Steve Wozniak, who co-founded Apple with Steve. And the thing that Woz will tell you is that Steve needed to get fired from Apple. That yes, he was a great visionary. Yes, he was the guy that got it off the ground. He was the charisma, he was the drive, he was the vision, but he was not the leader. That company was not going to get to where it is today if he wouldn't have been fired. That Steve needed to go off. He needed to start next. He needed to eat a little bit of crow and come back. That it was only whenever Steve came back that then the legend of Steve Jobs was born. And so it really is one of those cases where even somebody who is regarded as such a titan of leadership is somebody that had to go off and learn a lot of things about this. So I think that's why I said about the guardrails and some of these other things. I think this is what trips a lot of people up, right? Is because it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel like something that comes naturally to a lot of people. But I think the reality is that that's often the case. In a lot of cases, it's just simply the people who are able to push past that, to overcome it. This is why so often you'll see people who are in leadership positions who often probably shouldn't be because they aren't really that bright, but oftentimes they're able to push through that and simply they're willing to put themselves out there in that leadership position. So the trick is to be able to push through it, but to actually have something to say whenever you kind of get through that and you get put in that position. So that's the thing that I think I want to try to dig in on and try to help with a little bit. So where do you start? You're going through this. It's something that you want to get better at. You're aware of kind of what are these things that are working against you. So where do you start on trying to be a better leader? And I think that for me, I've probably narrowed it down to 7 critical characteristics, critical aspects that I think need to go into being a better leader. So if these are the things that if you're going to go into work tomorrow, if you focus on these things, you're going to become a better leader. Your team's going to get better. You're going to make more of a difference. And so the first one is honestly just to focus on the most simple thing. Focus on the fundamentals. And so one of the things that I've done in studying leadership is that I've gone out and I've talked to a lot of really interesting people. I've talked to venture capitalists, I've talked to sports agents, I've talked to athletes, I've talked to chefs and coaches and a whole bunch of other things. And one of the places I come back to often is sports psychology. And whenever you hear a coach talk about a team that's doing really well, one of the things you'll often hear them talk about is how they're focusing on the fundamentals. And I think that this really is a key part of leadership, is to understand that no matter what your team does, you have to have an obsessive focus on getting the fundamentals right. I think oftentimes whenever I come in to a team, that's one of the first things that I want to focus on, is to make sure that they're really getting the fundamentals right, the basics, that the way that we're going about things, the process that we're using is getting done right. Because if we have a bad foundation to build on, if we aren't doing the fundamentals right, the more complicated stuff isn't going to work. So I think that that's the first thing, is just like make sure you're really getting your fundamentals right. The next one is one that I think sounds incredibly easy to say. Well, that's actually the point of it, is that things are incredibly easy to say. But the second one, honestly, for me, is to walk your talk. Because I think this is a place where I see so many leaders break down. Because you're put in front of a whole bunch of people. You know what they want to hear. You know the things that are going to make them happy. You know the things that they're going to respond to. Well, saying those things isn't terribly hard, right? Like if you spend any time with them, you can make a quick list out of that and understand where you need to go. The problem from a leadership standpoint is to be consistent, is to execute, is to deliver, and not just deliver in the easy moments, right? I think the easy moments of leadership, anybody can do. Where great leadership is really defined, where great leadership is differentiated, is in the tough moments, is in the hard moments, in whenever you need to go in and you need to tell them what they don't want to hear. You need to tell them the thing that's getting screwed up. You need to go in and to be the person that's going to be able to take that stand. And I think that to be able to do that, you have to be able to be consistent. You have to set that standard and then actually follow it, because people are smart. If you talk about doing things one way and then you go off and do it a totally different way, people notice and that they start to lose faith in you. And I think that's what so much of leadership is about, is walking your talk, is developing that faith and being consistent in things. And so this isn't something that it's easy to point to an example. There's not a trick. There's not an easy thing to do. But I think for me, a big part of, I think, why a lot of people respect me from a leadership position is a lot of times I'm the guy who will say the thing that everybody else was thinking, and I'm the guy who will go and have the hard conversation. Even if it's not easy, even if it's not something that I want to do, that I try to carry myself and I try to do it all with consistency and in a way that people can respect. Like I'm a huge believer in put the shoe on the other foot. So if the roles were reversed and I was sitting in their shoes and they were sitting in mine, how would I want somebody to treat me? And at the end of the day, for me, in a lot of cases, while there may be a sting in honesty, well, the reality is that that's what I really want. That's what I would have respected at the end of the day, instead of somebody that was just going to feed me a line, just glad hand me and tell me what they thought I wanted to hear, and then go off and do something totally different or do it behind my back, right? So I think that that's, to me, is the importance of really knowing kind of how to walk your talk. The third part of it for me really starts to, again, continue the theme of honesty, but also add a little bit of vulnerability. Because I think that one of the things for me is the fact that I like to externalize certain parts of my leadership process. I like to share with the team what it is that I'm struggling with. What are the things that I'm trying to overcome? That there's a recognition that from a leadership standpoint, I am not going to buy into or feed into this notion that leadership is one person. Because it's not. An organization of any size, whether you're 2 people or 100, if all that everyone is doing is looking to that one single person to make the decisions, that one single person to be the leader, that one single person to do everything, the team's going to fall down. And so for me, it's about having the confidence and the security to take some of the things that I don't know the answers to and open that up to let the team in, to let them have the chance to go on that journey with me. Because here again, if we're all invested in this together, that's something that I need to do. And so it has just been externalizing my leadership process so that in certain cases we can go through and solve these challenges, right? And I think this goes back to that fine line of perspective of you need to know when are the points whenever I need to let people in. What are the points where we need to make these decisions together? But what are the points where I need to be an outsider? What are the points whenever I need to point the way? What are the points where I need to be the one that has the vision to drive the group because something like comfort or fear are going to hold people back from really making the decision that they want? And this is a really kind of interesting and intricate dance is to know when and where to be able to do this. But because ultimately, the reason why you want to externalize your process is that people will support what they've been a part of. If all that I'm doing constantly across the board is dictating to them, telling them what they need to do, they aren't a part of that. They're simply a recipient of it. Whereas if I'm letting them in, and in certain places I'm letting them be a part of this process so that everyone is invested in this and everyone is believing in this, that's a process that's going to get adopted much more quickly. It's something that people are going to fight for much more passionately because they can see themselves in it. They know that they were a part of it in terms of doing it. So I think this is an incredibly important part of building that belief and building some of that culture up to do this. And I think that the other part of this, really will continue to revisit a lot of the same themes, but part of what it is are in those moments where you need to be an outsider, in those moments where you want to try to do something different, you need to understand that not everybody loves somebody who wants to be a leader because of the fear, the comfort, the fact that they don't want to do things differently. And I think this is something that it took me a little bit of a while to get used to, and to the point where, honestly, I've just come to embrace it and kind of love it, really, because of the fact that if I'm going to try to do something different, if I'm going to push people outside of their comfort zone, some people will naturally take to it, right? Like those are your fast followers, your great allies. They're the ones who get what it is that you're trying to do. The problem is going to be the other people, the people who just really want to kind of stay where they're at and do what they want to do. Those are the people who are not going to be your cheerleaders. They are not going to help you. If anything, they're probably going to try to cut your legs out from underneath you. And if you're going to come into an organization of any size and try to do things differently, you have to be prepared that this is going to happen. You have to be able to put some wins on the board. You have to be stronger than this trend. You have to be stronger than their fear and their excuses. And I think that this can be a really difficult thing because it can feel very isolating. It can feel very challenging. I know that this is something that I struggle with. This was another part of why I had the words "Here's to the crazy ones" tattooed on my right arm that I talked about in the welcome episode. Because there are some days that I need that reassurance. I need that reminder, because there are some days when leadership just fucking sucks and there is no way around it. And I don't know any other way to say it, because there are some days when you don't get to have a bad day. There are some days when your team needs you. They need you to be strong. They need you to be focused, because if all of a sudden something bad has happened, we're up against a challenge. We're up against something that's going to be tough to overcome. And the person who's in charge goes to pot, and all of a sudden, they don't have a plan. They're pouting. They're, going around throwing a temper tantrum. The entire team is going to fall apart. So in that moment, you don't get to have a bad day. In that moment, you get to be the one who is going to stand up and say, look, we have a plan. In that moment, and this is probably the best description of leadership that I think I've ever heard, was one of my old mentors would describe leadership as you simply are the most confident, uncertain person. And I think that's really it, is that I may not have all the answers, but I feel like I have enough of them, and I'm going to take responsibility and accountability for what we're going to do, that I'm going to say this is the direction we're going to go, and then I'm going to deal with the consequences of what that means. But it is just preparing yourself that the movies that you see and all these other things that want to lead you to believe and celebrate that process aren't always the case, right? Because I think that we've been told a whole lot of stories that celebrate the beginning and the end of this process. It celebrates the two guys in a garage, and then it celebrates the multi-billion-dollar launch at the end. And it glosses over the 80% of work that's in the middle, of overcoming the skeptics, of overcoming the people who worked against you, and all of those things to get it done. But the reality is that if you want to make a difference, and if you want to make a difference as more than just talk, because this is my thing, right? Like whenever we talk about leadership, I travel all over the world and I see a lot of people talk about this. And one of the things for me is that I also very quickly realize that what they're talking about is a theory for them. They have not done it. They don't know actually how to go through and do this. And that's the problem. Is because at the end of the day, we have to be able to kind of figure out how to push past this to make this real change. And so one of the things I've tried to do is, again, to try to become a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more open. And so one of the things that I've adopted that I think works really well is going to be the fifth thing we talk about. And that's a very particular model for how to get feedback. How do I get feedback on how I'm doing, and how do I give feedback to other people? Because I think feedback can be a tricky thing. Because here again, the fear, the comfort, in a lot of cases, again, go back to that stat, right? 85% of the people are afraid to speak up at work. So 85% of the conversations I'm going to have and 85% of the feedback I'm going to get isn't going to be true. That may or may not actually kind of hold true across the board, but for easy math, we'll say that it is. So how do you come up with a feedback model that overcomes it? How do you try to get to the truth? And so what I do is I usually ask three very simple questions. And what they are is, what do you really wish I would start doing? What do you wish I would stop doing? And what do you want me to continue to do? And the reason why I think this works so well is because in many cases, it requires very specific answers. That it's not something you can just kind of like laugh off. You can't give a general statement to. Like, these are things that demand you to actually be able to give me very specific things that you believe in. Like, what are the things that, whenever I think about this guy as my leader, I really wish he would do and would start doing this. At the same time, I really wish he would stop doing this. But you know what? There are a couple things that I think I really like that he does, and I really wish he would continue to do that. And I think that this is the challenge, is to get these sort of things out of people and to have these very direct conversations with them to be able to get to this stuff. And I think that also when you give feedback to people, to have this similar sort of model, because I think it's this exchange that makes all the difference. Because the reality is, leadership is a constantly evolving problem. It doesn't stay the same because your team changes. You change. You grow as you go through life. The organization around you changes. The market pressure that are put on your company changes. So leadership is a constantly evolving equation. It's not something that stays static. And so if you aren't able to constantly react to that and be able to kind of check in on where the team is, you're not going to be successful. And so I think that this is why, for me, having a bit of this vulnerability, asking this opinion, and even if it's something that I disagree with, that it's at least out in the open, that it's at least something that we can have a conversation around to be able to say, you know what, I know that you really wish that I would stop doing that, but I'm not going to, and here's why. And that I can at least explain to them why it's something that I think is important, because maybe it's something that they don't like, but maybe it's something that the team really needs. Or maybe it's something that politically is going to put us in the right position, or that at least then it's out in the open. Because it's not something that's going to sit and fester under the surface where they're just going to kind of grumble and roll their eyes and go, again, this guy doesn't walk his talk. He doesn't really kind of understand what's going on. And so this is the way to be able to have this sort of conversation. So I think about how you're going to have that feedback and get that sort of thing out of people. And so for the sixth thing, and I think that whenever I've spent some time recently, when I was in between my last two jobs, where I was able to sit down and just kind of say, what have I learned? From a leadership standpoint, just from a career standpoint, what have I learned? What do I know that I could tell other people? And I think that, so often, so many of these conversations start with, or the advice that people want from me starts with the work that I've done with Apple. And people come up and they'll ask me, they say, Steve, what's the secret to working with Apple? And the funny part is, whenever I tell them, that wide-eyed enthusiasm that seems to have drawn them to me of why they want to ask the question so quickly melts away. Because whenever they come up and they say, what's the secret? The thing that I always tell them is exactly the same. I always will say, have great ideas and work your ass off. And that always seems to be the answer that they weren't rooting for. That wasn't the answer that they wanted. They wanted some other answer. They wanted there to be a secret. And I think that that's the thing to me, right? Like, if you want to be successful in your career, if you definitely want to be successful as a leader, success is a choice. Success is something that you need to be prepared to do whatever it's going to take to make happen. Because this is the thing, like from a leadership perspective, there are plenty of times when you could take the easy path. You could cave in and go with the conventional wisdom. There are plenty of times where you could take the easier way out, right? Those people aren't remembered, and those people don't change things. Those people are the ones who end up 10 or 15 years down the line, looking back and saying, why am I somebody who's only managing people and not making a difference? And, all the hopes and dreams that I had have suddenly faded away. And I know that may be an overly kind of Machiavellian view of the world, but I've traveled around and talked to too many people who have asked me questions and have been in that situation to not at least recognize the fact that that's the truth. And I just think that if you want to be a great leader, if you want to be a great anything, success is a choice. And you need to be willing to do what it takes to make that happen. You need to be willing to put in the work. You need to be willing to have the hard conversation. You need to be the one who is going to fight fear and comfort and complacency and all those things where the road to mediocrity is paved with excuses to overcome it, to do something great. And so this is the thing, is are you willing to do it? And I say this because I think people genuinely need to think about this before they take on some of these problems. That they need to think about, are they really ready to be able to do this? Because I think if you're going to step into it and you're going to try to take this on, you have to be willing to make success a choice. You have to be willing to do that, because too many people will do it half-heartedly, and as soon as it gets hard, they want to step away. And so that's my thing, right, is to teach people that it is a choice. And if it's a choice that you're willing to make, you know what, don't stick your toe in the pool. Do a damn cannonball into the other end and really try to do it, and to try to go after it as hard as you can, because I think that's why I'm where I am. Is because I've been willing to put in the work. I've been willing to prepare for an opportunity that I had no idea when it was coming. To do all these other things where it just really was going to lead to the fact that for me, I was not going to lead the outcome up to chance. That at the end of the opportunity, what I was going to say to myself is that, you know what, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I wouldn't have done it any differently. I feel like I did everything that I possibly could to be able to get this outcome to happen. And so just write that down somewhere. Think about it, that you need to be able to prepare to steel yourself against all these problems to make success a choice. And finally, the last thing, and probably the biggest thing, is that I think, you know what, to be able to do all of this, to be able to overcome all of this, to be the person who can be the leader that you want to be, and to do it the way that you want to do it, you've got to embrace your crazy. And I think this is something that you know what, it may sound like it's a marketing gimmick because I've got a tattoo and gee, isn't that funny? And that's the name of this podcast, and gee, isn't that funny? But at the end of the day, for me, it really is something that cuts deeper than that. That for me, it really has become about embracing my crazy. That it really has become about the fact that the way that I do things is different. The way that I go about solving problems, the way that I try to motivate people, the way that I try to do this stuff is different. And for a long time, those critics, the people that made leadership tough, One, they were the people that tried to convince me that doing this was hard, that what I was doing was wrong, that doing things the way I wanted to do it wasn't the way to do it, that I just needed to give in to conventional wisdom and the status quo and to go along with it. And I'm sorry, but I'm one of these people that has gotten to the place where I've had enough success that I can stand here and tell you that those people are full of shit. That they aren't the people who understand how to actually change anything. Well, those are the people who understand how to maintain what's already been built. And that is not what leadership is about. And so for me, to think about what are the things that make you special? What are the things that make you strong? What are the things that make you stand out from everybody else, that draws people together, that brings them together and gives you a platform to bring about this change? It gives you a platform to be a leader, because those are the things that you have to embrace. Those are your CRZY. And that those are the things that are going to ultimately make you successful. This is the opportunity and it's the challenge. That these are the things that are incredibly personal. They are incredibly strong, but they're incredibly different for everybody. And this is why leadership, much like creativity, is hard. It's why not everybody is good at it. It's why actually very, very few people are good at it, and even fewer people are good at teaching it, because it's one of those things that very few people actually understand, is that you've got to be CRZY. You have to embrace it. Because at the end of the day, unless you want to just be like everybody else, you have to be different, and you have to be okay being different. And this is something, like I've said, I'm not up here to tell you a fairy tale. This was something that I struggled with for far longer than I'm proud of. This was something that I struggled with getting done to the point where I had to tattoo something physically on my body to remind myself not to do it again, because I was so angry and fed up with it. And so I think that's the end of this, right? That's the biggest piece of wisdom that I can lead you with, is the fact that you just have to embrace your CRZY. So we're going to take a break here. And this is the two-part show that I said. And so whenever we come back with the next piece, we're going to talk about, now that you're straight on your CRZY, now that you understand the challenges you have to overcome, now that you understand what you need to do to make success a choice from a leadership standpoint, how do you start to apply that to a team? Because I think it's all well and great if you get it straight in your own head, but communicating that out to a whole nother group of people and having that be effective is a totally different challenge. And so I think this is something where I've spent a lot of time really trying to kind of overcome that bridge, and want to walk you through some of the things that I've learned. So as usual, you can find more episodes of this podcast. You can find related articles and a whole bunch of other stuff over at podcast.stephengates.com, STEPHEN, and Gates like Bill Gates.com. If there's anything that you really feel like you want to talk about, if there's something here that resonated that you felt like was really good, if there's something that you just feel like I didn't cover, if there's something you think I got totally wrong, I'd love to hear from you. And I think this is one of those things where I really want to try to make this a conversation. So shoot me an email. Send it to ask@stephengates.com. And I'm going to cover it in a future show. I'd really like to be able to get to the place where we can start to have a dialogue about this. If you have something to say, shoot it on over. The boys down in legal always make me want to say that all the views that are here are my own. They don't represent my current or former employers, so this is me just out here ranting. And as always, thanks for the time, right? I think that's the only thing that's truly a luxury is time, and I definitely appreciate it. So thanks for listening, and until next time, stay CRZY.